After the rise of the Islamic State, during the times of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and in the later periods including the age of Andalusia and the Ottomans, we have considered the oldest historical mosques in more than 12 Arab and European countries. In order to see the landmarks of those time periods and the Islamic conquest that are associated with them, and the role that they played in spreading the civilization of Islam, which the Arabs are carrying forward with every passing generation. And so, the mosques we cover in this series have many historical stories since they were founded. The mosques in this series have stories that have to be told and cannot be forgotten. Their stories are a living embodiment of the age of Islamic Renaissance. They are part of Islamic history. They are the oldest and most important mosques in the world. Mosques with a vibrant history. With God's permission, they were built to last. This famous tower in Seville is called Al-Giralda by the Spaniards. It is now part of one of the largest cathedrals and is considered one of the most notable architectural landmarks in the world. However, this minaret is the most notable remnant to this day of the great mosque which the Mohammedans built in the Andalusian capital when they assumed control over it after rescuing those lands from the greed of the surrounding Latin kingdoms. This minaret remains an eternal relic of that period in Islamic history in general, and the history of the Andalusia in particular, and the great historical events that took place during that period. Despite this tower being part of the Great Mosque which the Muhammedans set out to build in Seville in the year 567 Hijra or 1272 CE. This was a place of interest since the conquest of the Andalusia for all Islamic dynasties which came before the Almohads. The first mosque was built here by Abdul Rahman II, also known by the name Al-Awsat, the fourth Umayyad Caliph of Andalusia, caretaker of Andalusia, in the year 214 Hijra or 829 CE. When the Almohads took control of Andalusia after the age of the Moravids and made Seville their capital, the city witnessed a great architectural movement during which mosques, walls, castles, towers and palaces were all built. The old mosque of Seville was now too small to accommodate all those who came, and so Musa al-Mahdi set out to build the Great Mosque, which became a symbol of the Almohads' power in Andalusia. It was almost as big as the famous Mosque of Cordoba, for it contained 17 hallways. It was 150 meters long and 110 meters wide. Its worship hall was built, which survives to this day. Its completion coincided with the victory of the Almohads over the Castilians in the famous Battle of Arques in the year 592 Hijra, or 1195 CE. After the Battle of Arc, Al-Mansur ordered 4 gold pieces to be made to decorate the minaret. Its walls were decorated with magnificent carvings, which indicated the level of advancement achieved by the Islamic architecture of Andalusia. It became an example for the Almohads and for the others when they built the minarets in the Maghreb. Merely 50 years after this achievement, Seville was captured by the Castilians in the year 646 Hijra, or 1248 CE. After 5 centuries or so, during which Seville gave the world unrivaled cultural achievements. The first thing the Castilian King Fernando III did was to order the Great Mosque to be converted to a church. The minaret became a bell tower, and at the top was placed a bronze statue which spun with the wind, called a jalalo, or windmill. The name then became Al-Jaralda. After about 2 centuries, the entire mosque was demolished except for the minaret. A new church was built over its ruins, the Cathedral of Seville, which is the 3rd largest cathedral in the world. Today, all that remains of the original structure is the lower part of the minaret, which is about 65 meters out of 97 meters of the total height of the tower.
This is the last remaining part of the mosque known as the Mosque of Seville. Its design is inspired by North African culture. It is enormous.
The mosque covers an area of 24,000 square meters. When the Christians came to Seville and saw the great size of the mosque, they immediately decided to convert it into a church.
We are standing at one of the main entrances of the structure. People who came here were required to pay an entrance fee. This was known as the entrance tax.
Despite the end that met Seville and its mosque, and the many attempts during the past 8 centuries to alter its character, the city still retains many of its Islamic Andalusian architecture. This can be seen clearly in many of the modern buildings that were affected in one way or another by the architectural styles which incorporate Islamic architecture, drawing from the cultures and civilizations which passed through here.
The tower we just filmed with the barrier leads to this place, to a passageway that leads straight to the heart of the city. The silver tower, with its 10 sides, which we can clearly see here, this way, please. This religious image represents an important idea for Christians, assuring the victory of the city's inhabitants.
The architectural remnants here are a witness to the greatness and prominence achieved by the Muslims in Andalusia. This includes the walls and the towers which the Moravids started fortifying, and later the Almohads reinforced them until they were 6 kilometers long, containing 116 towers and 12 gates.
This tower we see here is called the Golden Tower. Its origins are Islamic, from the first Islamic era. The last part contains an extravagant design, supported by decorative ceramic shapes. When the rays of sunlight strike the ceramic surface in the morning, the sunlight is reflected strongly and can be seen by the people on the beach of Seville. This tower was built in 1222 AD, during the Islamic period. It is the last remaining landmark which represents the Islamic era here. "28 years later, the Christians entered the city. We will never forget this part of our history.
The Spaniards here are interested in a historical site called Alcázar, which became a palace for the kings of Spain. Initially, it was the ruling headquarters built by Abdul Rahman III. It underwent a great deal of renovations, which mixed between Islamic architectural arts and local patterns.
This is the royal palace. The history of this palace dates back to the 9th century AD. When the Muslims came to Seville, they entered the entire Iberian Peninsula, which is known nowadays as Spain. They came to rest in the city of Córdoba. The Caliphate began in this very palace. Here we can see some Arabic inscriptions and words on some of the windows. We can also see them on the facade. There is some Arabic writing on the blue ceramic, which is still clear after all these centuries.
We don't need to go into great details about this palace before being reminded of the fate that met the great mosque in Seville. We leave the city with conflicted emotions to explore the remnants of other mosques which were built during these times in Andalusia.
There were many mosques as well as churches, but unfortunately these mosques came under attack after the Muslims were expelled, and after the Granada Wars during the 10th century CE. Some of the mosques were converted to galleries. We have never heard of Muslims converting mosques or places of worship into galleries or museums. Or even into a stable for animals, but unfortunately these things happened in Andalusia, such as Al-Hamra Palace or Al-Khazar, and Al-Zahira Mosque in Cordoba, which was built in the time of Abd al-Rahman and Nasruddin Allah. He was the strongest ruler in the world. All that changed, unfortunately, and is not longer the reality.
Leaving Seville behind, we head towards a city in western Spain known to the Muslims as Tojala. Its Spanish name is Trujillo. In this city there is another mosque which met the same fate as the Great Mosque of Seville. However, there are some remnants of the Islamic age in the city, such as its famous and fortified castle with its square towers. The city of Tojala was described by Muslim travelers as a big city, like a big fortress with fortified walls. This city played a big role in defending Andalusia against attacks from the Latin kingdoms, especially in the age of the Almohads, when the Castilians suffered a great defeat in this city. When history came full circle and the cities of Andalusia were captured one after another, this city fell to the Castilians 26 years before the fall of Seville. Its castle and mosque and other structures met the same end that would later find Seville and the other cities, despite the courageous stance the residents took to defend the city. The bell tower in the centre of Tojala Square was originally the minaret of one of the town's mosques. Spread throughout the place, we find signs of Andalusian architecture and many other towers that met the same fate as the mosque's minaret. We find the same thing has happened everywhere we go in this country. What happened to the mosques of Zaragoza about 100 years before that is outrageous. And also to the castles in the surrounding area, such as that of Castle of Ayoub, one of the northeastern fortresses of Andalusia, known as the High Fortress. The towers that we see in the streets of the city have a distinct Andalusian character. The historical buildings here are a clear record of what happened during these times, at the beginning of the 6th century Hijra, or 12th century CE. The city of Zaragoza was one of the most important Islamic cities in Andalusia. It was captured during the first wave of the conquests led by Musa bin Nusayr and Tariq bin Ziyad. For 4 centuries, Latin kingdoms failed in their attempts to control the city. The first thing Alfonso I did in Zaragoza was to convert the mosque to a cathedral. With time, it was heavily modified to suit its new function, including covering some of its main features, such as the niche and the Qibla wall in particular. The Muslims built this mosque when they first entered the city. It was Hanash ibn Abdullah Sanani who designed it and pointed Qibla towards Mecca. He was an architect of Islamic mosques in the Maghreb. He took part in building the Mosque of Cordoba and the Mosque of Albuera in Andalusia. Nowadays, the Great Mosque of Zaragoza is known as the Cathedral of Saint Salvador. It is also called the Church of Lazio. After 9 centuries of Latin control, this mosque still retains some aspects of its Islamic architecture. Near the city of Zaragoza, there's a castle called the Castle of Ayoub, or Calatiod. in Spanish. It met the same fate a year after the fall of Zaragoza. The fortress, which was perched on a breathtaking height, was unable to protect it. The castle, with its strategic location, was built right after the Islamic conquest, near the end of the 1st century Hijra, by the governor of Andalusia, who came after Abdul Aziz bin Musa bin Nasar, a man called Ayub bin Habib al-Lahami. He took part in the first conquests. The town, which contained the castle, was of great historical significance before the days of Muslim rule over Andalusia. The prevalence of castles in this area points to the large defensive responsibilities of this area in facing aggression of the Latin kingdoms. And so, this place became known as the High Castle. It was captured by Alfonso I in the year 513 Hijra. Even though 1300 years have passed since the castle was built, it still retains many of its original Islamic features. To this day, it contains a complete set of walls with Islamic style. As for the town surrounding the castle of Ayub, it contains many Islamic relics, especially the mosque, which met the same end as the other mosques in Andalusia and was converted into a church called Santa Maria. The base of the minaret remains an indicator of what this place was during those times.
This tower was an Islamic minaret in this small village. Up to the middle, as we can see, it stayed the way it was. Its architectural form hasn't changed from the way the Arabs built it. From the middle to the top, certain elements were added after the Christians entered the city.
Our tour to find the mosques of Andalusia isn't over yet, for there are places where mosques bear witness to those important periods in Islamic history. The most important of all, perhaps, is Cordoba, with its great historic mosque.